Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh for everybody. Our topic today is fiqh and ethics. My name is Mutaz al-Khatib. I co-teach scriptural ethics in the college and methodology of Islamic ethics and ethical reasoning and decision making. So we will discuss today a very problematic topic nowadays. And first of all, I would like to hear from you. What do you expect from this lecture, and what do you understand from fiqh and ethics, and why didn't I use Islamic law and ethics, and I used fiqh? So we can listen to just few of you, and then start the discussion.
A very good morning. So, what I expected from the title of the session is like, why is it not Islamic law and why is it fiqh? Is it because it is not eternal law, and fatwas are, the fiqh laws are being changing, and it depends on the situations that we make laws. And the most important thing that both are interlinked with each other. Like when we are, drawing the final judgment on something or the opinion. It could not be a judgment of a ulama. It is just an opinion with which the person could ask, and he is having the free will to follow it and not. So that's it.
Any other comment? Yes.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum. Of course, even prior to reading the handout that you gave us, I already realized that fiqh has a broader meaning, which also refers to discernment and not limited to fiqhul asghar, to the hukum hakam only, to the branches, to the furu' matters. So it has a broader meaning. So I'm not sure whether I'm curious to see how you would integrate the broader conception of fiqh into ethics. But nonetheless, even if you were to limit.
So you think fiqh is broader than ethics?
Yeah, as per. No, I'm saying that fiqh is broader to fiqh in the jurisprudence sense, as per how Imam Ghazali pointed out to us.
Okay.
So, I'm hoping to learn more how you would draw out from this discipline to formulate an Islamic ethics. Wallahu a'lam.
Thank you very much for both of you. Yes.
I'm asking myself whether the title supposes that fiqh and ethics are two topics who are standing beside each other, because the title isn't ethical dimensions in fiqh or ethic in fiqh, it's fiqh and ethics. So it supposes that maybe there can be a connection, but we don't know. So I'm curious to hear about the relationship between fiqh and ethics.
Okay, so thank you for your comments, and this is the outline of this lecture for today. So we will start with concepts and terms, then we'll move to fiqh and ethics with a question mark, and then to contemporary approaches, then classical approaches. We'll go back to see how the primary sources, or some of the primary sources, dealt with this dilemma, with this binary, and then how can we define the field based on my opinion and my study, my research. And then we will focus on casuistry, 3 cases, specific cases, to apply what we are going to discuss now. And then at the end, we will discuss the text that you have in your hand now. I hope that everybody has a copy now. Okay, so let's start with the terms then. So when we say fiqh, I'm not going to give a lot of details about the concepts because if we will go in deep discussing the concept of fiqh and ethics, it will take so much time, but I will give you just a brief conclusion about the concept that I'm going to rely on, or I'm going to use these terms based on. For fiqh, it's the famous or the popular definition of fiqh in the Arabic sources. Each one has to have two copies, two different texts. So, okay, as fiqh, the popular definition of fiqh in the Arabic literature is العلم بالأحكام الشرعية المكتسبة من أدلتها التفصيلية. العلم بالأحكام الشرعية المكتسبة من أدلتها التفصيلية. Which means the disciplined research, the disciplined search for the حكم. We mean by حكم determination, assessment, ruling, judgment. So the disciplined search for the حكم that is appropriate to a given situation or act based on the authoritative source or sources. So now it means that fiqh means that we have to find a hukum for each single action in our lives with an argument and reference or authoritative reference or source and justification. So because fiqh is based on epistemological framework, which means that each action in our lives, that there is no divine hukum for each action of our lives. Now, this divine hukum, sometimes is clear and addressed directly or implicitly or explicitly by the text, the scripture, and sometimes it's not addressed directly or indirectly. So we have to explore the divine will behind this action. So this is the epistemological framework that fiqh is based on. Now let's move to ethics. Ethics as a term and concept is a problematic one, but in the contemporary time. But in the classical time, it was clear. It was well defined in the classical time. I mean, before the modernity, before the 19th century, it was well defined, well disciplined, and the border of this discipline was clear in the classical philosophy, whether it's in the Greek philosophy or in the classical Islamic philosophy. And ethics means, in the classical time, in the classical concept, means that the popular definition of ethics is, in Arabic literature, is هيئة للنفس حاملة لها على جميع أفعالها من غير فكر ولا روية. هيئة راسخة في النفس حاملة لها على جميع أفعالها من غير فكر ولا روية. Which means that ethics as a condition or a well-established characteristic of the soul that drives the actions of the body. So all our actions, based on the classical concept of ethics, are the result of our soul. So the actual doer is the soul itself in the classical philosophy, whether Greek and Islamic, both of them. So they address the soul as the actual doer. So all our actions are the result of our inner soul or inner will. So this is how it was defined in the classical philosophy. Now, in the classical literature, the classical literature has always considered ethics to be part of a practical philosophy or practical wisdom, al-hikmah al-amaliyah. So they centered hikmah, wisdom, and they they defined hikmah in the Greek philosophy and the classical Islamic philosophy. They centered hikmah in the middle, and then they divided hikmah into two sections: practical wisdom and theoretical wisdom. Theoretical wisdom, now we call it philosophy. And practical wisdom is what it was divided into three categories in the classical philosophy, Greek and Islamic philosophy. Number one is self-discipline, which means ethics. سياسة النفس in the classical Arabic language. سياسة النفس, discipline, self-discipline, how to manage or to cultivate yourself. So this is the discipline of ethics in the classical time. And managing domestic or family affairs, this is what we call it now economy. So it was part of the practical wisdom, جزء من الحكمة العملية. So how to manage or cultivate the family and the domestic. Now the third category under the practical wisdom is سياسة العامة, سياسة الناس, what we call it now, cultivating the people, what we call it now politics. So now wisdom is in the center, al-hikmah, and then it's divided into two categories: practical and theoretical. Theoretical is philosophy, we call it now philosophy. Practical is divided into three categories: economics, ethics, and politics. Now, in the contemporary time, we moved to a new definition or concept of ethics. Now, we are not using, we are not committed to the classical concept anymore, but we moved to a new concept, which is a problematic definition, actually. But my definition to ethics in the contemporary time, and this is the concept what we use, or at least I use in my research, to answer three main questions. How should I live? How should I act? And to define the sources that help me to answer the first two questions. How should I do? And how should I live? And the sources. So now, if we try to reconcile between this definition, my definition, and what's going on in the contemporary discussions on ethics, how should I act? It refers to the normative ethics, what we call it normative ethics in the Western discourse. How should I live? It refers to virtue ethics in the Western discourse. And the sources, it refers to what we call it meta-ethics in the Western discourse, moral philosophy. So this means that ethics is dealing with three levels or three main questions: normative, virtue ethics, and meta-ethics. So we mean by normative ethics, the ethics or evaluating our actions. Virtue ethics is the lifestyle, the ultimate goal that we have to achieve in our lives as individuals. So this can differ from each one to another, from one to another. So, but there is in the Western secular moral philosophy, there is a clear distinction between how should I live and how should I act. Because, there's a clear, the secular discourse tried to make a clear and strict distinction between private and public. So how should I act? It links to the public. And how should I live? It's my individual decision. It's my individual decision. This is based on the Kantian philosophy. So he differentiated between these two two questions. But in the Islamic discussion, it's more complicated, and we cannot differentiate between the individual and the public, in that very strict and clear borders. There is, in some cases or levels, there is a distinction, and in other levels, we cannot do this distinction because, how should I act will affect my perspective, how should I live, and the opposite, vice versa. How should I live the lifestyle that I'm going to achieve in my life, and my objective, personal or individual objectives in my life will affect my actions. So it's not that easy to differentiate between the two questions. This is why in my definition for ethics, I linked the three questions together to reflect the Islamic concept and discussions on what we call it ethics now. So now let's move to the second point, fiqh and ethics, which...
May I just ask a question?
Yes.
You distinguish between classical Islamic philosophy and the Hellenistic philosophy?
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. What do you mean when you say classical Islamic philosophy? You mean the philosophy of the 13th, 14th century?
Yes. I mean by the classical philosophy from al-Kindi, the Arabic philosopher. He was in the 4th Hijri century. It means 10. And after that.
So
al-Kindi was the first philosopher, Arabic philosopher in the Arabic philosophy.
But you also mean the Islamic philosophy who is influenced by the Hellenistic philosophy,
yes.
right?
Yeah,
okay.
But okay, they didn't translate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, they was influenced by the Greek philosophy, but they modified and added their own
epistemology.
Yes,
Okay.
own epistemology. Al-Kindi, I think, in the 3rd century, in the 3rd Hijri century. Yes, 3rd and 9th century. Now, many Orientalists claim that the modern concept of ethics is absent in Islam, and fiqh is merely a body of legal rulings reflecting the interrelation between religion and politics. This is the main claim that started in the Oriental discourse in general. It doesn't mean that every Orientalist say this, because I remember well that Goldsheher gave a focus or mentioned the point that there was a moral dimension in the Islamic tradition in his book, Introduction to Islamic Jurisprudence, I think, and Theology. So he gave attention to the moral dimensions within Islam. So this doesn't mean everybody, but generally, there are some Orientalists said that the concept of ethics is not existing in Islam, and even still, some contemporary philosopher, American philosopher, Paul Hegg said that when I used to say in front of my colleagues in America that moral conscience is existing in Islam, they were surprised, because they have the impression or the assumption that moral conscience is not existing in the traditional societies, and this is something modern. So it's interesting because we will deal with this point later. But the general assumption that ethics as a concept is not existing is absent from Islam because they looked at the fiqh as just a set of legal rulings. So reflecting the interrelation between politics and the religion. But in the beginning of the 1990s, we found that Majid Fakhri started or organized his material according to a typology in his book Ethical Theories in Islam. He organized his material according to a typology of ethical theories, and he came up with 4 types of ethics. What he called it: scriptural morality, theological theories, philosophical theories, and religious theories. So here we find 4 categories that he typed Islamic ethics in the classical time from the beginning till the 15th century. From the beginning till the 15th century. So, and he stopped at the 15th century. So he typed the material that he found in the classical time in these 4 categories. So philosophical, theological, scriptural, and religious, what he called it religious. It's not clear to us what he means by religious, because, religion was in the theological and philosophical and scriptural. So this was criticized, this typology was criticized, that was a subject of criticism, because it's not comprehensive and it's not clear. Not just because of this, he was criticized because of this, but he ignored Islamic law or fiqh. You see, when he talked about religious theories, he didn't talk about Sufism and didn't talk about Islamic law. So Islamic law and Sufism are not there and are absent in his approach to what he called it ethical theories in Islam. So he followed the classical perception of ethics that it's a branch of philosophy. And this is why he didn't address it here. So because there was a classical approach that, as I started in the beginning, that ethics is a branch of practical wisdom. So it's part of philosophy. It's a branch of philosophy. And until now, we are the first college and the only Islamic college which studies ethics within Islamic studies. So till now, those who specialized in ethics in the Arab world and even in the Western world, they are studying ethics under the College of Philosophy, not under the College of Islamic Studies. So we are the first college who do this, who take ethics and study ethics as a branch of Islamic studies. So we moved out of the classical perception of ethics and its position in the classification of knowledge. Now, George Horani, even in the 1980s, he focused on ethics, but his approach was theological ethics. So he approached Islamic ethics through the lens of theological discussions. He also examined al-Ghazali treatment of the ethics of actions in al-Iqtisad في الاعتقاد, إحياء علوم الدين, and al-Mustasfa. So he addressed or tried to analyze the ethics of actions in al-Ghazali's work through focusing on 3 main works of al-Ghazali, the 3 books, al-Iqtisad في الاعتقاد, إحياء علوم الدين, and al-Mustasfa. And he found a consistent theory. About the ethics of action. Now, the main interest for man is personal salvation, and thus the concept of obligation as essentially connected with social justice is absent from Ghazali's ethics. This is what he concluded to, but I don't agree with this conclusion, you know, because I believe that still al-Ghazali needs to be read with fresh eyes, with fresh ideas and approaches, to not try to impose al-Ghazali to be fallen under our pre-assumptions, you know. So I'm not going to discuss this issue, but okay, I must say that I don't agree with his conclusion. So now, you see that Islamic law here is not there till now, you know. The first opinion that the concept of ethics is absent, and Islamic law just, you know, a set of legal rulings. The other two opinions here, or researches, so they said they excluded Islamic law from ethics as a branch of philosophy or theology. But now we will move to the contemporary approaches. There are other approaches try to explore the link between fiqh and ethics, or Islamic law and ethics. So the first one, or the most important one, the most important article here in this regard was the article written by Kevin Reinhart, the American scholar. He wrote the article that I sent to you to read it before in advance, Islamic law as Islamic ethics. So his idea that Islamic law and legal theory must be the true locus of the discussion of Islamic ethics. The true locus to explore the Islamic ethics. And the fiqh process, in his opinion, is highly formal and has as its aim to understand the import of revelation for human moral life. He focused on the 5 categories that are very famous in any for everybody who is familiar with fiqh. The 5 fiqhi categories of acts: obligatory, prohibited, recommended, discouraged, permitted. These are the 5 categories. It's written in the PowerPoint. Obligatory, al-wajib. Prohibited, al-muharram. Recommended, al-mustahab. Discouraged, al-makruh. And permitted, al-mubah. So 5 fiqhi categories of acts is not merely the Islamic understanding of the abiding moral form of life, rather it is at the same time a repudiation of the accuracy of the simple bipolarity moral categorization of good and bad. We know that in the classical theology, one of the main issues that were discussed in the Islamic classical theology was, you know, how al-husn al-qubh, good and bad, you know, and how to address the nature of evil and good, al-khair wa-shar, or al-husn al-qubh, and the sources, the source that we can derive or know, gain knowledge about what is good and what is bad. This was one of the main theological issues that were discussed intensively in the classical theology. But in the fiqhi discourse, we moved from this binary to a very comprehensive one, which is 5 mainly. But actually, we have more than 5 in the fiqhi, in the legal theory, to cover or to address the complex human being actions. So, but these are the main 5, you know, the key 5 categories. But we have more. Even, you know, some fuqaha discouraged into 2 types. كراهة تنزيهية and كراهة تحريمية. So, and some other jurists, one closer to prohibition and one closer to permissible. And some other jurists divided obligatory into two types. So one is called in Arabic wajib, and the other one is called fard. Why they divided the obligatory into two types? So based on the source of knowing the ruling. So based on the source, we can differentiate between two levels within the obligation, like wajib and fard. So if the source of knowing the obligation is decisive, so it will be a higher than if the source of knowing the wajib or the obligation is not decisive, it's probable. So this is just a general idea. I'm not going to make it more complicated. So going back to Kevin Reinhart, so he considered Islamic law as the true locus to know Islamic ethics. So Islamic law is Islamic ethics. So the 5 categories, in his opinion, represent an inclusive moral system, since it recognizes the two-tier membership in Muslim societies, those who live between the boundaries of the obligations and prohibitions, and those who strive to adhere to the recommended and to avoid discouraged acts. So we have two groups here, so they can be included in these 5 categories. There are some people they are satisfied only with living in between the borders, obligations and prohibitions. And there are another group who are seeking for the perfection, to doing all the mandubs, recommended actions, and to avoid all the discouraged actions. So it based on the human being capacity and the lifestyle, how should they live? The first question that I addressed, I mentioned before. Now, the other example for addressing the relationship between fiqh and ethics is John Kelsey, the American scholar even. Yes, also.
Sorry to interrupt you, but just going back to Reinhart in the previous slide, it seems like a very limited view or a very small bird's eye view of ethics.
Yeah.
And what it basically means is that it precludes non-Muslims from being ethical people. What I come away with is that for you to be an ethical person, you must be following Islamic law, Islamic fiqh, in between the I suppose the obligatory and the non-permissible from whatever, from one extent to the other.
Yeah.
Failure to do that, hence being a non-Muslim really, would mean that you're not capable of being an ethical person.
He didn't mean this, but he's trying to, as a scholar, he's trying to explore the link between fiqh and ethics within the Islamic tradition. He's not talking about in general, and he's not giving a general judgment on other or non-religious people here. As a scholar, he's trying to search and to understand, explore the moral dimensions within Islamic tradition.
I understand, but it also means that, for example,
you can
Islamic
leave
law
this
equals
question
ethics.
for the discussion. How can we go far from this? So I'm just trying to give you an overview about the different approaches, and then I will give you my understanding of the dilemma or the issue. So now John Kelsey wrote an article in the 1990s even, I think. He studied a risala by a Shafi'i, Kitab al-Risala. Kitab al-Risala is the first source on Islamic legal theory. Shafi'i died 204 Hijri. So it means like around 8th century. So he wrote this very pioneer work, a unique work, and he tried to provide a theory or a systematic framework to understand or to derive rulings from the scripture, the Islamic scriptures. And then, so John Kelsey came to this book and analyzed this work, as a meta-ethics work to explore the divine guidance and its role to judge and evaluate our actions. So he studied a risala by Shafi'i on Islamic legal theory as an example of an approach to ethics that focuses on divine commands and presented some observations on the place of Shafi'i's theory in the history of Islamic ethics, particularly with respect to his comments on the ethics of ikhtilaf, disagreement. So the famous theory within ethics is the divine command theory. And Shafi'i is the most important representative of this theory. So Risala is one of the key works and the first work actually to theorize this theory, divine command theory. So that, and this is why he proved or demonstrated in his work, Al-Shafi'i, I'm talking about Shafi'i here. So he demonstrated how that there is a divine ruling for each human being action. And this point was accepted in general in the later works in Islamic theory, in Islamic legal theory. There were other opinions, but this is the main theory, that it was perceived well in the later works, and it was addressed intensively with different arguments. So now we will move to another approach, which is provided by Wa'il Hallaq. Wa'il Hallaq said that this binary is alien. So, and this is a product of modernity. So he said, he argues that in the writings of Muslim jurists, the binary division is essentially problematic. It is one of the products of modernity and something alien to the system of knowledge produced by Islam. So he rejected this binary because this is a part of modernity, because in the classical time there was no this binary, and because it means that fiqh and ethics are the same in his opinion. And the question is wrong question to ask about the differentiation between fiqh and ethics, because fiqh, Sharia in general, in his conception, is a comprehensive and integrated or interrelated with social, politics, moral, and other dimensions, cultural, legal, all this, Sharia. Now, we have another opinion with Hashim Kamali. Hashim Kamali, he said that the distinction between Islamic law and morality lies in the fivefold moral categorizations, whereby the obligatory and forbidden have their legal implications, but the three remaining intermediate concepts lie in the realm of morality or ethics, which cannot be considered as laws. So he tried to differentiate between law and ethics within the fivefold categories. So he said that law is linked with obligation and obligatory and prohibited, and ethics is linked with the remaining three categories. So it means that he's looking for ethics as something, this is my understanding, as something is obligated, being obligated. And for law is something as being obliged. So this criteria, differentiating between iltizam and ilzam, so it means that he's addressing law as something being obligated, and ethics is something being, obliged, and ethics as something being obligated. So I think this is not this is not consistent and doesn't reflect the Islamic tradition or the Islamic categorization of human being actions. Why? Because there are religious obligations, they are not part of law, like performing prayer, for example, the 5 prayers. It's a religious obligation, obligatory, but at the same time, we cannot consider it as part of law, So I think this criteria is not sufficient. This criteria to differentiate between ethics and law is not sufficient.
Can I just ask a question? On the other side, we have also laws who have an inherent ethical dimension.
Yes.
Isn't that also the case? I mean, when it comes, for example, to zakah.
Yeah.
So how will he argue that?
As I said, I don't find this differentiation or this criteria sufficient to reflect the Islamic tradition or to reflect the existing situation of fiqh even, So, but with zakah, I don't know how will he argue about this. And the zakah is a complex example because it has there is a historical experience with dealing with zakah as part of the political and government tools to collect money from people, and in the current time it's an individual decision, So this is a complicated example anyway. Now, these are the contemporary approaches to the dilemma between fiqh and ethics. As you see, one of them said that, okay, this is an alien issue and it's not existing in Islam, and this is a product of modernity. And some others try to explore ethics from different angles. One of them said that, okay, Islamic law is Islamic ethics, and try to analyze Islamic law to explore the Islamic ethical dimensions in Islam. And then another research went to the Islamic legal theory to explore what we call it meta-ethics. And the third one tried to, explore the relation between law and ethics from the 5-fold categories. So we have different angles now, saying to explore or to discuss this relationship. Now let's move to the classical sources. Let's go back to the classical sources and see how this problem was addressed in the classical sources, in some classical sources. So is it something new, just new, and we are just trying to discover something new, or it was addressed even in the classical sources, and how it was addressed? So I will take just a few examples here. The first example is al-Raghib al-Asfahani. Al-Raghib al-Asfahani, we don't know for sure when he died, but I suppose that he lived in the 4th Hijri century, 10th century. So al-Raghib al-Asfahani, he wrote many works, But the most important work in this regard is الذريعة إلى مكارم الشريعة. His book الذريعة إلى مكارم الشريعة. الذريعة, the path toward Sharia's virtues. So they translate makarim as virtues. We can argue about this, the accuracy of this translation, but anyway. So he talked about, we are among the, a very important contribution which differentiates between two types of Sharia. Two types of Sharia. Makarim Sharia and Ahkam Sharia. So he coined this division, so that under Sharia we have two types, Makarim and Ahkam. Makarim, it's like, it was translated here, virtues, but religious nobility or moral nobilities, and Ahkam, rulings. So he left aside Ahkam, the rulings, and he was exploring and analyzing the virtues of Sharia, or Sharia virtues, or Sharia moral nobilities. So noble virtues, makarim of Sharia, are more linked with the perfection and the ultimate goals of a human being in their lives. And they most deal with the question that I mentioned before, how should I live? So those people who are seeking for the perfection in their lives and to be Khalifatullah. So vicegerent. But vicegerent is not a political term here, as it was used later. But it's a moral concept here, a moral term. So he means by vicegerency, he argues that the vicegerency of human being is based on the recognition of the presence of God, Tawheed, and the efforts of mankind to apply divine prescriptions and to respect values and rules, both individual and collective, in every facet of life. So, as I mentioned before, there is a link between individual and collective. How should I live and how should I act? It's clear in his definition now about the vicegerency, individual and collective. So, and he tried to, theorize or list the higher objectives of a human being, مقاصد الخلق. So, and he said that مقاصد الخلق, the main objectives of a human being, are three. So, عمارة الأرض, civilization, عبادة الله, worshiping God, and خلافة الله, being vicegerent. So the vicegerency again is not a political concept, because this is the most dominant conception now in the contemporary time. But here we are among different concept about vicegerency, so, which linked with a moral content and theological content. So these are the key objectives of a human being that each human being has to achieve in his life. Worshipping God, عمارة الأرض, to achieve civilization, and Khilafatullah. So Khilafatullah, being vicegerent of God on earth, Khilafatullah cannot be achieved unless we go through the process of being committed to the rulings, fiqh, the rulings, ahkam al-sharia, the rulings of sharia, and then after that achieving the makarim al-sharia, the religious nobilities or noble virtues. So we cannot achieve noble virtues unless we are being committed with the rulings. So like it means here, like with rulings we are in the borders, the limited borders, but with noble virtues we are going for perfection, a higher degree of morality. But be aware that he didn't exclude morality from being just committed to ahkam, to rulings. So he has, for example, an interesting example. He labeled worshipping God in 3 levels. So ibadatul abid, this worshipping God as a servant. Those who are just obey God because they are afraid of Him. So the key value, the key motivation of them to worship God is fearness. And ibadatul tujjar, those who are worshiping God just to gain hasanat, being rewarded. So the key motivation for them to obey God is to get to being rewarded. So this is, he called it ibadatul tujjar. And ibadatul salihin, the righteous people, those who worship God because they love to worship God. So the motivation, the value that motivates them is love. So here we are among, 3 categories of people worshiping God. We are talking about the same action, worshiping God, but with 3 different values or motivations. So based on this, in each value that we can label or rank these people. So now here we are not talking about rulings, strict rulings. We are going beyond rulings. So the rulings deal with, performing the worship as an obligatory work. But with this rank or classifications, we are going beyond this. What type or what kind of worship that you are going to? What are the feeling and motivations that you feel when you worship God? So we are talking about the quality here, not the performance, just performance, ada. So the quality of worship and the value that behind this worship, and your state when you worship God, the state, al-ahwal, the states, al-ahwal. Abu al-Hasan al-Mawardi is another example. In his book Adab al-Dunya wa Deen, he focused on the link between fiqh and ethics, and while insisting that rules and obligations be given priority, he adds that in life, as for the management of the self, of power, and of society, ethical values, the highest of which is nobility, that magnanimity, al-muru'a, closely linked to dignity, sharaf, and nafs, must be respected. So he talked about, in his work, in Adab al-Dunya wa Deen, the ethics of the world and the religion, Adab al-Dunya wa Deen, he focused on different issues, but I would like to spot a light on 2 main issues that he provided us a classification of, or the objective of being righteous people in the life, salahul abd, with different values, with like six values. He provided 6 values to being a righteous people. And salahul dunya, he talked about, what the salahul dunya, how can we say? Goodness of life. Yeah. So goodness of life. So, and then he explained, he gave more details about these two categories. How can we be righteous people, and what are the conditions that we have to achieve, or it should be existing to be a good to have a good life, Of course, religion is an essential element in his approach. The third example is Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali is a very famous scholar, and his book Ihya Ulumuddin is very famous, I assume. So he started from the concept of fiqh again, and he redefined fiqh, the concept of fiqh, as to be linked between worldly life and the day after. So in his conception or definition of fiqh, that fiqh is combining, or fiqh combines between the two dimensions, the here and hereafter. So, and he criticized some jurists because, or the general conception of fiqh, that it's stick just with the worldly aspects. And he tried to link or reconcile between fiqh and ethics in his book Ihya Ulumuddin. So he linked between law, fiqh, and spirituality. The last one, the example that I would like to mention here, just briefly, and then we'll come back to this author through discussing or analyzing one of his texts that I gave you. Abu Ishaq Shatibi. Shatibi sets, he provided us with two key points. Number one is trying to zoom out and think of the system of the Sharia. He zoomed out and thought of the system of the Sharia. So, and he tried to define the objectives of al-Shari', maqasid al-Shari' and maqasid al-Khalq. So the objectives of God and the objectives of human being, and how these two types of objectives have to be in line, and how they work in the applications, how this will be reflected in the applications, in our daily lives, in our actions and lifestyle at the same time. So we will discuss his text after the break. And the second point that he provided is, theorizing what we call it maqasid sharia now, as a science, or as a branch of science. It was coined before him, but he was the first one who theorized, this categories. The 5 categories of sharia, which are preserving religion, human life, intellect, lineage, and property. So, as I said, we will come back to this author later. Now, how can we define the field of ethics and fiqh? So, I suppose I wrote many articles dealing with this issue. Some of them are in Arabic, and some of them are in English. So I'm not going to give all the details, but I'm just going to give you just lines, outlines or key points that you can help us to understand the link between fiqh and ethics. So these key points will be like binaries. Differentiating between الدياني والقضائي, legal and religious. So legal being addressed or justiciable issues. I mean by legal here, justiciable issues. Those issues that can be adjudicated in the court. This is what I mean by legal here. The subjects that can be adjudicated adjudicated in the court, you know? Okay, this is what I call justiciable. And non-justiciable, the religious matters. Like, you know, it's a personal issues, and it cannot be judged at all. So within fiqh, we have these two dimensions, and they are mixed within the sources and literature, and not differentiated. You know, so if we go back to this binary, it will help us to understand deeply, you know, and to differentiate between two levels, dealing with actions in private and public. And the second binary is talking about literal and objective. You know, we have in each legal rulings, in each legal ruling, we can differentiate between the form and the value. The form and the value. So, for example, you know, performing prayer is a form in a specific way to pray and to perform prayer, but performing prayer is something, and the value behind praying is another thing. You know, so the punishment itself, there is a form of punishment, legal punishment. Now I'm talking about legal punishment, and there is a value behind the punishment. So the form and value sometimes can be combined, and sometimes there is dislocation between the form and the value. This is a dilemma. This is a normal dilemma, you know, with dealing with religious rulings or legal or state laws, or, you know, in our lives. Sometimes they come together, and sometimes they dislinked in our performance, but not in our awareness, you know, or in our theories. Okay, so we theoretically we are trying to achieve both, theoretically, but in performance, practically, we don't success all the time, you know. So the practically is something different now, but our objective is to combine between the form and the value itself. The third binary is ultimate and changeable. We have two key levels within Sharia or Islamic law or fiqh. الثوابت and المتغيرات, you know, the ultimate, الثابت, and changeable, المتغير. There's a concrete set of rulings within any religion or within any law even, you know. But there are some other laws or rulings, or, you know, they can be changed based on the context, the time, and, you know, and other elements related to the context and the time or the place sometimes, you know. The other binary is haqqullah and haqqul ibad, you know, the rights of God and the rights of human being. In Islamic jurisprudence, we have three categories, you know. There are some rulings related to the rights of human being. If I steal, you know, stealing is something related to haqqul ibad, because I stole a human being, you know. So the other human being has a right in this. So it's his right now. So he is the owner of this right. So this is haqqul ibad. for example, stealing. But, there are rights of God, like worship. Worshipping God is the right of God. It's not a human being right. Why this is linked morally to a very essential or key moral principle, which is being gratitude to the one who was the creator, who created you, and this is why we are committed to our parents, because they were the reason, to being existing in this life. So being gratitude to the one who was the reason of your existence, behind your existence. And existence itself is a value. And we have to be gratitude to this value and to the one who caused this value, who established this value. So this is why there is this parallel between being gratitude to God and worship Him, and being gratitude to our parents, So the creator and those who were the means of being created, So it's morally linked again. So haqqullah and haqqul ibad, the rights of God and the rights of a human being. And there is a third category, which is the shared rights. Sometimes the same right is shared by God and by human being, Like, for example, raping, Raping is shared, It's the rights of God and the rights of one of the two parts who was raped, So it's a shared right. It's not a human being right or not just divine right, because there is another part here, the third part here. And there is another binary even, it links to the what we call it meta ethics now. It's about the sources that we rely on to derive rulings or evaluate our actions. We have textual sources and non-textual sources. So by differentiating between these two types of sources, we can differentiate between the legal, and it helps us to differentiate between legal and ethical. Legal, when I use legal here, I mean by the state laws, and justiciable. And the last binary is very important and essential. It's constitutive of Islamic law. Like urf, custom. Sometimes we derive our rulings or we evaluate our some actions based on the custom within a specific society. And this can be differ from, Qatar to Pakistan to Morocco to Belgium to many countries. So because there are some norms, social norms, are based on, based on the common sense within a specific society in a specific time. Religion has nothing to do with this, it's social. So, and this is how, one Muslim country can be different from another Muslim country. And both of them are Muslim countries in general, but we find a lot of differences, cultural and social differences between these countries. So it means that the custom plays a very important role in these applications. This is just an example. There are many. And the last binary, which is very essential and constitutive to Islamic law, is the here and the hereafter. All our rulings and evaluations are based on this binary. So nothing in fiqh or what we Islamic law is out of this binary. Now, justiciable issues can be fallen out of this binary because just in the procedure, not in the epistemological framework, just in the procedural issues, because we cannot judge in the justiciable issues. We are among procedure, so we have to stick with the procedure, because you may have the right, but you don't have evidence, and when you go to the court, you will not get your right. So procedurally, we have to stick with this procedure to keep the system. But in the day after, you will get your right, and the other person will be punished, religiously. So, but at the end, we have to stick with the procedure. So again, we go with justiciable issues. We are going back to the form and value. Form and value. Here we are among procedure and ethic and values. Procedure and values. So sometimes if you follow the procedure, you cannot achieve the value. For some reason. Maybe you didn't do your job, or there's corruption in the judge court, in the court, in the legal system, in the state, or I don't have evidence, so for some reasons. So there is a problem with the procedure then. But okay, the procedure didn't help me to achieve to get my value, or to achieve the value. So we always keep trying to develop the procedure to achieve the value. This can be applied not just in the court, in the administration, and everywhere even. When you need to set rules in a committee or a company, or So when we put rules to regulate our relationships, but sometimes this can mislead to achieve the values behind the rulings. So this is why we keep trying to do this. So the last point here is that when we talk about ethics, the problem arises in Islamic tradition in how to define the nature and range of Islamic ethical thought without, on the one hand, importing and imposing upon it Western conceptual categories, and on the other, accepting such broad and elastic a definition for ethics which include every moral sentiment ever expressed. So, and I will stop here. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And we will come back to casuistry cases.